joined this morning. First up, Mr. Dale Buckner, CEO of Global Guardian. Dale's retired Special Forces Green Beret officer, lived and operated in over 70 countries globally, and he's the founder, president, and CEO of Global Guardian. Just a word about Global Guardian. This is the group that you want a relationship with when things go wrong. Now, you also want a relationship with them before they go wrong so they can help you keep things from going wrong. But when they go wrong, like they did in New Orleans with the recent storms, Dale and his team went in and evacuated hundreds of people for several hospitality brands. They're the people that you call when you've got travelers stuck in a certain place, or you have executive officers that are going to be traveling together to a program where there's going to be a convergence of people. These are the people. We haven't talked much about this in our hospitality space, but it's time we think about our people that are traveling and how we keep them safe and how we implement risk mitigation protocols to keep them safe. And as Dale will tell you, it's not just about traveling people, it's also about our people here, whether working remotely or back in our offices. So Dale's going to kick us off this morning. You're in for a real treat. Welcome, Dale.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm watching the time. We're about 5 minutes behind, so I'm going to make up for it as I'll get through some slides a little fast, just so we stay on track. So I'm very mindful of that. We had set this up for 15 minutes, a briefing 15 for Q&A. I'll do a little modification. As I go through, there's not a topic I'm going to talk about that all of you are not very well informed on. We're all living this together, all these topics I'm going to go through. When we get to Q&A, challenge me. Tell me I'm wrong. You can disagree with me. You're going to find I'm going to talk about some political hot buttons here. I don't want to shy away from those things. I see too many speakers that don't want to talk about things that are controversial. I'm happy to do it, but I'll caveat with, you can beat me up. You won't hurt my feelings. I'm going to have an adult conversation with you. I'm not looking for a fight per se. I just want to talk about, I'm one perspective, nothing more, nothing less. And then lastly, everything I talk about, I'm living. As we go through this, whether it's COVID, medical evacuations globally, getting people out of New Orleans, Afghanistan. I have 6 cyber hack cases going on right now. I'm living everything I'm talking about. This isn't some theory from a book or an article or anything else. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of comfort in that. And I'll talk about any topics we get into Q&A. Next slide, please.
And Dale, feel free to take your time. We'll make up the time during, we'll manage it.
Okay. I just didn't want to get all wildly off track. I picked 3 topics. COVID-19, again, you're wildly informed. We're all, but I'm going to give you some updates, if you will. I do want to talk about security threats here in the U.S. and abroad, specifically here, just because we've got some real issues going on in our country right now. And then lastly, some natural disasters. We just had Hurricane Ida, as Stephen discussed. We got a little over 800 people out of New Orleans in that area. I think we've got about 6 weeks left with hurricane season here. But of course, there's wildfires, there's other natural disasters going on around the world we're involved in. Next slide. I'm going to start with kind of this overview, a macro overview of COVID. I think 2019, 2020 have proven the variants have been the big Delta, no pun intended. Delta variant has kicked everything to the right for corporate America. Our view of this in my client base in the Fortune 500 was the kids were going to go back to school in September. People were going to start coming back to work. And of course, this summer, starting in July, Delta variant here in the US really took hold and everything's been pushed to the right. As you look at this, you can see where these different variants are coming from. It's a mix of undeveloped and developed countries for the most part. Ultimately, the macro view of this is we've now got 6.39 COVID vaccine shots distributed, billion shots distributed globally. We need approximately 11 million to get the globe, or excuse me, 11 billion to get the globe near 70% of the world vaccinated. As you look at that map, the light yellow is where there is little to no vaccine being distributed at all. And the issue is this. 80% of all the vaccine distributed around the world has been to wealthy countries. 1% has been distributed to the third world or the developing world. The problem is, as these underdeveloped countries, these variants are developing, there's variants being developed right now that nobody even knows about yet, that the world just hasn't been exposed to, but it's happening. And the issue is, if it's an all or nothing situation, we're either all secure or none of us are secure. So the distribution of vaccines is unequal, if you will, and it puts all of us at risk. You can't just think, well, my country's doing well, therefore we're safe. That's not how this is going to work. And as you look at this, I think the new estimations right now that just came out of Johns Hopkins yesterday, it will be 2023 before we get to the third world. That's how slow this is going, which means we're all at risk till 2023 at some level. So the variants are the number one risk, and it continues to be. Next slide. To highlight what happened here in the US, you can see that red line on the left chart. That is the United States and Canada. The Delta variant has created in the last 4 months real material problems for us reopening. I think all of us are living that. You know that, you feel it, you sense it. On the right, regionally in the US, you can see the South, the blue line on top. And then, of course, the dotted line with West Virginia has had a majority of the problems in this country. And that shouldn't surprise anybody. With what we know about vaccination rates by region, there's no real surprise there. The one takeaway that's not shown on the slide, the Delta variant and COVID sick personnel and COVID deaths have now come down every week since September 13th. So we're going on 3 full weeks of the Delta variant starting to come down right here in the United States. That's great news. The issue is now we're in a race. It's October 6th. We have winter coming in certain parts of the country, and we're in a race to get this down and under control before winter hits and we all start going inside and we spend less and less time outside. Now we've got another explosion on our hands. Next slide. And just simply to summarize, and obviously we've had a little transition on the font here. Bottom line is the developed world is a problem for all of us. There is significant progress with 6 billion shots, but we need 11. So we're not even halfway there, basically, or just over halfway there. And the new projection globally is we're not going to get to the third world till 2023, which means none of us are truly there till 2023. Vaccine hesitancy, whether you agree, disagree, you can hate me for the statement, it's a problem here in the United States. We have a solution. I'm a former Green Beret. If you've served in the military, State Department, CIA, Special Forces, the military, whatever, or you played sports in high school, we have all been vaccinated at some level. I tell my own staff, and I've had to release 4 people that would not be vaccinated here at my own company. Where was the moral outrage when you played sports and you had to be vaccinated? Where was the moral outrage if you were a Marine and you were being sent to Iraq and you got 31 shots? I didn't have anyone, there was no moral outrage about that vaccination process. But here I am in a global pandemic with a global business operating in 131 countries, and I have my own employees that don't want to get vaccinated. It's a problem. Whether you agree or disagree with that, happy to have the discussion. Next slide. I'm going to transition now to a problem in this country and frankly globally, but we lead the world in this. We as Americans kill more of our own citizens than any other country in the world outside of war zones. And in some cases, we mirror war zone shootings. Ultimately, most of you have probably heard this. The United States in 2020 had the highest murder rate in the history of our country. We haven't come down materially. We're still increasing now in 2021. Some parts of the country are flat. Some have come down, but in the aggregate, we are still increasing our murder rate across this country. St. Louis, Baltimore, New Orleans, Detroit, Cleveland, Las Vegas, Kansas City, they all led the way in these mass murders. Some of those cities had murder rates increase from 2019 to 2020 in 50 to 60+%. Atlanta, 64% increase in murder rate in a year. It's staggering. We have a gun problem in this country. We have a violence problem in this country. this is not going away, and it's going to be a political hot potato forever. I don't see us getting out of this anytime soon. When you see those 4 stats in the top left, 10 people killed in California, 10 people killed in Boulder, 9 people in Indianapolis, Atlanta, 8 people killed. These should be red flags that we have a problem as Americans, as a country. This is an issue, and we don't seem to be able to grasp it, and we don't seem to be able to fix it. My last comment with COVID is standard services of 911, EMS, and fire have clearly been degraded. Police forces have the highest retirement rate and people quitting that we've seen in decades. This is a problem, and we're not getting out of this anytime soon. Ultimately, as business owners or advisors to business, I would say this: make no mistake, you are more on your own in the security of your business and your people than you've ever been. Next slide. How do we get here? As you look at this, I'll simply say I've served all over the world. I've lived outside the United States the majority of my adult life. I've seen environments like this in Bosnia and Haiti. I've seen it in Colombia, Honduras. I've seen it across the Middle East. Ultimately, what I'm seeing, I never thought I would see in the United States. As you look at what COVID did to our economy, the number of people being fired, furloughed, laid off, it shows that the United States is more vulnerable than any of us thought. Ultimately, the economic hit that we took with COVID, lack of social services in this country, the politicalization of those services. When you look at all of this, with the implosion of more people dying of heroin last year in this country than ever in the history of our country, and the stress of people, ultimately desperate people do desperate things. And that safety net within our country that made us different than most of the rest of the world clearly is much more vulnerable than all of us thought as Americans. Next slide. I'm going to transition to ransomware. We're doing pretty well on time here. It's right at 9:30. Most of you have heard this term ransomware. In layman's terms, if someone penetrates your system, they can get into your system, freeze it through ransomware, and then basically hold all of your information hostage in layman's terms. This is the number one cyber threat to businesses. If that hasn't been said to you or that's not obvious to you, I'll say it again. Ransomware is the number one threat to business right now in the cyberspace. As you look at, all of you are familiar with the Colonial Pipeline. They did have VPNs, but they were not multi-factor authentication. They did pay $4.4 million. I am in 6 cyber cases right now. My firm led the 3rd largest cyber case in US history a couple of years ago, and I did that with the FBI monitoring. Ultimately, both the US government, who has been failing for over 30 years to protect our country in the cyberspace, and corporate America has massively failed in protecting its businesses because no one takes it seriously. The problem with corporate America is they want a single button, an easy button. It doesn't exist. Ultimately, this is a layered approach. Yes, you have to have an enterprise security platform, but then you have to monitor every cell phone, every laptop, and with dispersed workforces in this country now because of COVID, most businesses have not mandated that every laptop, every desktop, every cell phone is on a VPN that's monitored in real time. None of their businesses in your workforces have mandated to evaluate the security of your router in homes, to check the Wi-Fi at people's homes. It's great that we have the ability to work from home, but now you have an entirely new element of cyber vulnerability. The FBI last year saw a 79% increase in cyber cases for business. We've seen a 250% increase in cyber cases for business. It's a problem. And the issue is everybody just wants to buy a software platform and say they're secure, and it's not real. You have to train your people. You have to monitor every phone, every laptop. No one at your firm should ever be allowed to use public Wi-Fi, ever. Not at a Starbucks, not at a JW Marriott, not at a Ritz, ever. Everything should be through a hotspot, or your phone is the hotspot, and all of it needs to be monitored in real time. If you haven't made those material changes, you continue to be behind and you will continue to be vulnerable. Next slide. And this just lines out all of those things that I just kind of highlighted. Of course, the endpoint protection. If you haven't heard that term, the endpoint is you, the human being. The vulnerability in cyber is the human being, your interaction, how you use your phone, how you use your laptop and how you connect into your company. That's the vulnerability that nobody seems to be able to get their head around. Next slide. Last topic, climate change. Whether you believe in this, don't believe in it, you can agree, disagree, doesn't matter. What is undeniable is the oceans are dying. What is undeniable is we've had the 5 most powerful hurricanes in the history of the United States in the last 5 years. What is undeniable is creating havoc with drought and fires, whether it's the West, here in the US, the Sudan, wherever you look on the globe, it's having real effect. Next slide. We just finished with Ida this year. In 2017, for the hospitality industry, if you remember the 2 back-to-back hurricanes, first hitting the Virgin Islands, then hitting Puerto Rico, we got a little over 2,800 clients, primarily from the hotel industry, out of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. This has become part of my business. I can guarantee that I'm going to have at least 3 to 4 major global disruptions a year now that are predictable, based on hurricanes, wildfires, tsunamis, whatever the case might be. It's now predictable, and there's no denying the globe is changing. If you ask, and you can Google this and find it, the #1 threat, according to the Department of Defense and our Pentagon, to the future of conflict is global warming. There are theories and there are exercises being exercised now around the thought we will go to war over water someday, much like we have gone to war over oil someday. This is, in my estimation, real. I believe in it. I'm living it. I'm responding to it. You can agree or disagree, but what is undeniable is the effects of what is happening within business, what is happening in the effects of travel, and more importantly, as a business, if you're going to open a new headquarters, part of the calculus will be, what is the wildfire? Is this region in drought? Am I too close to the coast? 10, 15, 20 years, am I going to have a coastal erosion problem? Literally, the environment is going to start driving your next decision on where your headquarters is at. That's where this is going from a business standpoint. Last slide, please. Obviously, the unvaccinated world is creating variants. Those variants are going to affect us all. There is no way to hide from this. If you think just because we're doing well, or Israel is doing well, or Chile's doing well, that you can hide from this, it is not factual. Obviously, the United States, our fabric, our social contract with our citizens. I'm 53 years old. I've never seen the United States more at odds over its sexuality, over its politics, over its race, or over its religion. That is a reality that is undeniable, and you're seeing it every day, and it is manifesting itself into our murder rates and our violence rates in this country. Ransomware, #1 threat to all of you in business. And lastly, weather, agree with it, disagree with it, global warming, it's going to affect your business, your employees, and your future of where you do business. It's undeniable at this point. I'll pause there for question or comment.
Thank you, Dale. Terrific as always. Question from Jeff Moore. Let's see. Do VPNs make public Wi-Fi safe?
They make you safer, yes. It depends on the connection. The gap between your phone or your laptop to that Wi-Fi and where you're connecting in. If you're on a solid VPN and it's monitored, you minimize that risk exponentially. But there's still a risk that, and there's a device about the size of my cell phone here, where I'm at the JW Marriott and I put in my room number and phone number, and I think that I am logging into the hotel Wi-Fi. I'm actually, and this is an industry, in every 5-star hotel in every capital city in the world, there can be a hacker sitting in the lobby using a device that big that intercepts that signal, replicates the JW Marriott Wi-Fi page, and I'm not logging into the JW Marriott, I'm logging into his platform. So depending on that platform and where you sit, there is still risk.
And that's a good point. Thanks for that question to get us started, Jeff. And Dale, on that topic, and of course, Jeff, feel free to chime in, but Dale, on that topic, do you see hotels beginning to offer secure Wi-Fi mechanisms as a point of distinction to attract business conferences?
Yeah, look, I have 3 major hotel brands that we support. One of the 3 have finally caught on to this. This matters because as you look at this, the hotel industry, as people in the cyber world like me talk about this, it's not good for your brand. If you walk in, and I travel every week, I walk in and they say your last name and room number is your way in, or there's no password for the Wi-Fi. I hear that every week, depending on what hotel chain I'm at. It is a problem because now the hotel brand is now part of the problem. So the reality is the hotels have an opportunity to create a differential to say, here is our platform. It is encrypted. This is the way in. This is a safe way to communicate and connect. You can create a differential in your space depending on what business you're in and what you do, whether that's a restaurant, it's Starbucks, it's the Hilton, whatever. There is an opportunity to ensure that you create safety for your traveling or your clients. That would create a differential. And obviously, it will help corporate America and the United States government protect itself.
Yeah, and that's a great point because so many people are working remotely. It's not just the hotels, ladies and gentlemen, it's the restaurants, it's the gathering places where people are going to have a modicum of socialization, but we need to begin thinking about how to have encrypted access to encrypted type internet access. Don't you? I think you just said that. So I just want to emphasize that.
One other comment on that, Stephen. I think if any of you are doing business with the government, you're living this right now. The requirements on the cyber side, if you're executing an RFP with the government in the next 2 years, are going to be exponentially more difficult. No longer are you going to be able to write and say, here's my policy on Wi-Fi, here's my policy on passwords. All this superficial garbage. This is going to get really hard. You want to do business with the U.S. government, you're going to have a real system. And you're going to have 7 layers of encryption and defense in order to do business. And I think corporate America is headed that way. All the major banks and financial institutions that we do business with, the second largest bank in the world, spent 3 days in my office in order for us to renew our contract with them. Physically, 3 cyber analysts in my office testing all my systems in person. That's where this is going because, again, the U.S. government has failed for 40 years. Corporate America has failed. No one has figured this out properly, and no one is spending the appropriate amount of money on it. They're not training their employees. They don't understand what a phishing attack looks like. They don't know how to travel. They don't know how to set their systems up. And they're certainly not monitoring every laptop, every desktop, and every cell phone in real time the way they're going to have to. I think the next 24 months, there is going to be material changes in the cyber hygiene standard in both corporate America and the U.S. government, because we've all failed. We've got to get ahead of this. We can't keep bleeding our IP to the Chinese and the Russians and everybody else.
And that's certainly what's been going on. Dale, I want to take a kind of a 10,000 foot look at what you shared with us this morning and just ask if I'm on the right path with your thoughts. I know we've talked about this a lot, so I think I have a good feel for it. But there are 3 primary challenges. You've mentioned several, but climate change, vaccines, and guns are all challenges for businesses out there. And so to put it another way, from your perspective, clearly climate change, getting vaccinated, reasonable gun control is good for people's health and good for keeping people alive. But is it fair that you align action on all 3 of those as pro-business also?
100%. Look, if we could have been out of this pandemic at a much greater rate than we are right now. There are people dying in the United States. It's completely unnecessary. That's bad for business. When people are relegated and are not coming back to work, not coming back to offices, and we are not reopening at scale and we're not traveling at scale yet. We Global Guardian are this month reached 62% of our travel support. All of you in these industries, whether it's hotels, whether it's restaurants, entertainment, whatever it is, you're all living this just like I am as a business owner. None of this is good for business. The fact that we are locked down because people are not vaccinated, not good for business. The fact that we have gun and violence problems in the inner cities of our countries and we murder each other at combat rates, not good for business. People don't want to go back to New Orleans when there's surges in violence. It's a problem for our industry. And lastly, at some point, we're going to have to face this as a country. Agree or disagree, we've got a gun problem, and it is not good for any of us in business. It is just absolutely tearing the fabric of this country apart, and none of it's good for business, period.
Yeah, to just no, I mean, semi pun intended, it's deadly for business.
It
right?
is.
Yeah,
There's
for
no
sure.
getting around it. It is what it is.
Dale, we've got another question. I think we've talked about it, but perhaps there's a distinction. Sanjay asks, in hotels, often it's the government employees that stay in the hotels.
Yeah.
Are they doing something in particular to protect themselves using hotel Wi-Fi in their rooms?
Yeah. So most of as the government is moving, whether you're in the Secret Service, the FBI, DOD, wherever you work in the government platform, the requirements of what system you're on, how you connect back to your government agency, who's monitored and how, all those things are changing very rapidly. And the policies are changing rapidly. Frankly, the government was just as bad as everybody else. They're running around the country, and you have agents who are dealing with very sensitive material on their phones or their laptops, and they were openly connecting on open Wi-Fi at the Holiday Inn. Like, they were just as bad as everybody else, frankly. So slowly but surely, these policies and these platforms are changing. And I think, agree or disagree, but the Biden administration has identified this as a material problem, and the standards for the government are changing like right before our eyes in real time. And it's going to get harder and harder and harder to do business with the government if you're not really truly secure. The standards are going to have rigor to them. Again, no more writing an RFP saying these flowery statements of what you're doing for cybersecurity. It's going to have to be rigorous in order to do it. And I think that translates to the government employees. They're going to be on a platform with rigor, with policy that has rigor, but we're still in the infancy of it.
Yeah, let's see. Kirby asked a quick question. Backups were mentioned for a modest sized business.
Yes.
Weekly full and removing the weekly backup physically and then reusing that the following reason. Kirby, where am I going with this? Then reusing that the following week, reasonable protection from ransomware. I guess it's generally speaking, Dale, from a mid-sized company, right? We don't have all the resources in the world. How do we protect ourselves from ransomware? Yeah,
like this is a common question. Having backups matter. If you get hacked and you get frozen through ransomware and your company gets shut down, this is a scenario very familiar to us. If you have all your data backed up, you can restart your company quickly. Now, the question is, how do you do that in an encrypted environment? If you stand up too early and use your backups, but you still have the exact same vulnerabilities that the bad guys just shut your company down, you haven't gotten anywhere. So is there value in having backups? The answer is yes. The issue is how quickly you stand up and use that information. Before you do that, you need to find, how did they get in? How did you get compromised? Where are the vulnerabilities? And make sure you plug that vulnerability before you stand your company back up. That's really the calculus here. So the simple answer is yes, it's valuable and you need it and you should have it. The counter is you got to be careful how you use that when you come back to life, if you will, and restart.
And we're going to let that be the last word on this particular topic. And we'll come back to Dale and Jeff when we do our scenario. So we'll have more opportunities to visit with them. We have one more question. Looks like the request for private Wi-Fi has increased, especially from transient business guests. And Flora and I think I appreciate you sharing that with us. We're seeing that more and more. Dale and I, we work in the travel risk mitigation space for the corporate travel community. And we're starting to see them put this type of vetting that Dale's mentioning into their RFPs for, and that your guys are going to get. And it makes it a little more challenging for the hotel industry because of the franchise model, right? You don't have as much control over your franchisees and the individual assets. So it's going to be challenging. But Dale, last question, what should be the first step to implement safe Wi-Fi? If I'm on the hotel or I'm at some other venue, such as a Starbucks or Fridays where people like to congregate and hang out.
Yep. If you're going to offer it, it's got to be encrypted. It has to have a ever-changing password system with multi-factor authentication, so that when someone wants to log in on your Wi-Fi, they get a text to that phone number that gives them a code that is a one-time code that disappears forever after they're on. And every time they log back in, they have to get a new code. So you've got to encrypt your system. You've got to create a multi-authentication program for your clients so they feel secure logging in there. And then the clients themselves had a responsibility to be using an encrypted system with either a hotspot or their phone for their laptop that has some level of encryption to minimize that man-in-the-middle attack, if you will.
And that could be a VPN, for instance.
Well, the VPN on their end, absolutely.
Yes.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. We're
Okay.
going to wrap this up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Let's say thank you to Mr. Buckner, as always. Great
you, sir.
information to get us started. Thank you, Dale. We'll see you again